I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 14th of March 2023, held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco, open at 5:36pm. Welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Okay, we've got all councillors in attendance in person today, and we're also assisted this evening by the New Look Executive Leadership Team. We're joined by the new Director Corporate Services and new Director Business Improvement, Emma Wollaston and Lynette Solomons, for the first time today, so welcome to you both. And welcome CEO and other directors who we've got to know quite well already. Okay, are there any disclosures of interest this evening for any of the items in the agenda? Nope. No approved deputations, and I think I'll leave any announcements for next week. So let's get straight into officer reports. We're taking questions on the agenda items for next week's meeting, beginning with C1, 126 Barker Road, Subiaco. Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. A couple of questions, if I may, please, to Mr Petrovski, if I may. Under the planning framework, what would constitute excessive development of a residential site? And are you able to cite an example when council has refused a proposal on excessive development grounds, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. The planning framework which applies, so the local planning scheme and the R codes relevant to single house and residential development, a combination of those, if there's excessions in building height, setbacks, overshadowing, open space. If there's numerous concessions, then council may consider that to be overdevelopment. In this instance, we are looking at a height issue in this respect, and there have been other instances where council has refused applications based on excessive height or excessive development. I guess in the city's assessment of this proposal, officers don't consider this to be excessive development. However, it is up to council to consider the application on its merits.
Thank you. And my second question is, the planning framework affords applicants the right to seek discretions for non-compliant proposals, which I think you've just alluded to, which, if subsequently approved by the city's planners, will take the form of conditions that must be adhered to before the plans can be recommended for approval in the related officer report. My question is there a numerical limit to the number of conditions planning staff will attach to a residential application? If not, why not?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. There is no numerical limit to the number of conditions that can be recommended on a proposal. In this case, there are 12 conditions recommended. Many of the conditions are standard conditions, and there are a number of conditions recommended which would address some of the discretions and non-compliances with the R code. So for example, visual privacy, street fences, and those conditions would alleviate those issues. So we don't think that there's essentially no limit on the number of planning conditions that one could impose on an approval.
Thank you. I've got no further questions, Mayor.
Any other questions on C1? Okay, let's go on to C2, 60 Bagot Road, Subiaco, a change of non-conforming use. Any questions? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMillan. Look, through you, as you see fit, a comment was made previously, I won't go into names or anything else, but the wording was must be less detrimental. And I would refer, my question is with regard to under the advice note, point Roman numeral point 2, just so staff's got a chance to catch it.
Are you looking for it, or are you waiting for us to find it? I think we're all good.
And the last part of it, where it just reads, the clients, it's obviously, we know what it's referencing, it's the code, and the clients to mitigate potential amenity impacts. My question through you is, if something must be less detrimental, right, why are we having to prepare a document to protect us from what sounds like the presumption that something is going to be detrimental, something is going to happen? Because if it's less, then it's, for 40 years that building sat there and nothing's ever happened, okay, so that's been fine, okay? And now we're proposing something else, but we're having to set a whole bunch of guidelines, because this reads to me as a positive affirmation that it's a preparation for an amenity impact.
Okay, well, I think we've got the gist of your question, and we won't go into questions of interpretation from the floor. Director of Development Services, are you able to answer the question?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So in the management plan, there's a reference to a number of points to be included in the code of conduct, and all the condition and advice note does is require the code of conduct to be prepared before the development is commenced, and essentially the conditions of approval relate to controlling the land use and ensuring that amenities is considered as it's relevant to the surrounding uses.
I didn't quite get the answer I was looking for. Not looking for, but didn't quite get. Don't take that as it sounded. That's really not my question. My question is, okay, we heard must be less detrimental. The word must, okay, but this. My point is simple, okay? You only need, call it a management plan, there's a whole bunch of plans.
Councillor Burns, we don't really want to hear a point from you at all. We want a question. So phrase it as a question and we'll get the advice that you need.
The question is, how can it be less, which it must be, if it needs a whole bunch of rules, okay, which the current use doesn't have any rules. Something can't be less if you actually then have to apply pages and pages and pages of rules, which has also been established that might need more rules later on. It can't be less, is my question. I don't see how something can be less. That's the question.
Yeah, you're diluting the question. I understand the question, and I think Director Development Services, you may have caught the question that was in the front end of that statement, did you?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. As I understand the question, it is about elected members and council coming to its opinion if something is less detrimental to the amenity of the area. The question of conditions attached is to ensure that the proposed use is controlled into the future after it's approved. So the question that elected members and council needs to turn on is if, in its opinion, the use is less detrimental to the use of amenity. The word must really refers to the two pillars of that clause being considered. So it's less detrimental and closer to the intended purpose of the zone.
Councillor White.
Thank you. If I may, just for clarity's sake, in last month's agenda for the ordinary council meeting, the recommendation was community purpose mental health facility, accommodation rather, mental health accommodation. This one is community purpose, what is it? Social services and accommodation. Can you explain why the difference has, why that's changed in the last 3 weeks?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the initial use of the mental health accommodation was to provide some context around how the site would be used. Following the council meeting last month and feedback received, we've updated it to social services and accommodation. That's not to say that that changes in any how the site is used or the conditions on the amenity impacts. It's just a descriptor. So we have updated it. We did include a note in the agenda that it was updated, but it was just staff felt a better description of the proposal.
Thanks, Director Prozowski, but my question was actually, why did it change? Why did you change?
Thank you, and through we felt after the council meeting that social services and accommodation was a better reflection of the proposal.
Councillor De Vries. Still going. Councillor White, go on.
Sorry, Rosemary. In point 2 of the recommendation, you say that the management plan has been approved, but then you're saying it shall be amended. On what basis is it approved and then we're wanting it to be amended? And sorry, maybe a quick follow-on just to save time. Are the only amendments you're proposing listed in A, B and C?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So condition 2 refers to amendments to the Code of Conduct, critical response plan and a handover procedure. And then following on to that, the end part of the condition says the approved management plan as amended shall be implemented in its entirety and adhered to.
Sorry, just again, I don't think you've understood the question. The Code of Conduct and critical response plan are not in the management plan, so they can't be included in that. It looks like they have to be produced as well in addition to. But I'm wondering why the management plan was approved when we're now wanting changes to it.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the management plan would only be approved if council resolves to approve it through condition 2, but the condition says the management hereby approved management plan, if it is approved by council, shall be amended to include the following, and the inclusion is the Code of Conduct critical response plan and the handover procedure. So by amending it, those aspects will be included in there. The amended management plan would therefore need to be implemented as required by the condition.
Sorry, thank you, that's helpful, but I was also asking, is A, B and C the only changes to the management plan that staff are recommending?
Thank you, and through you, Matt. At this stage, staff have recommended those 3 changes, A, B and C. It's open to council to request more changes.
Thank you. Sorry, Rosemary. Last question then. I'm still struggling with the term management plan. Even the first paragraph of the document says it's been submitted to the city for the purposes of the change of use. Why is it a management plan, considered a management plan? It doesn't seem to me to speak very much about management, and I know I'm not entering a debate, but I'm just trying to, I honestly don't fully appreciate why this is called a management plan, and in that I'm looking to it to understand how the facility will be managed, and it seems wanting in that regard. So can you just help me? As I say, the first paragraph on the first page talks about it as a proposal to us, rather than a management plan as such. Can you shed any light on that? Thanks. And that's my last question.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the reason why it's called a management plan was because on the first page, as submitted in support of the development application, the applicants have called it the Sanctuary Management Plan. So we've just used that terminology to be able to give that that document a title. Now, there are a number of matters in there which staff and planning officers have considered to mitigate potential amenity in the locality. There might be other internal management procedures and policies that the applicants may have. Essentially, what we'd recommend is that anything that relates to town planning be included in the management plan if there are going to be amendments. Any other internal policies and procedures on how staff and volunteers operate within that organisation's framework would probably sit separate in this instance.
I'm just going to cut the line because I've got a quick follow-up question, Mr. Petrovski. Is it possible to request copies of items A, B and C between now and next week's meeting? I suppose anything's possible, but could you request it, and are we likely to get it?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yes, look, we can put that request in again, as we have discussed this with the applicant previously, and their notion was that should this use be approved, then they will do the work with the volunteers and staff to prepare the code of conduct, critical response plan and the handover procedure to provide the staff and volunteers ownership of those documents, but perhaps a preliminary draft or something along those lines can be provided, and we can put that request in.
Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, that's through you, Mayor McMullen. These questions are a follow-up on Councillor White's questions as well. Like the question I was going to ask, but I've been jumped on that one, was the time frame for the production of the Code of Conduct and the Critical Response Plan, both of which are really important documents and can be quite time-consuming. So if you can answer that one first, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. The time frame is simply before the use actually commences, so they won't be able to start using it until those the management plans and documents are approved by the city.
Yeah, three, but the next question relates to the scope and sequence. So do you have any input into the scope of the Code of Conduct, and will you be, if you're unhappy with the information that's provided, will you be making suggestions or doing some pushback on what's the content of it? So that's a two-part question. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, essentially by recommending the condition and these documents be changed, that is the staff's pushback in the first instance. And in any event, we'd need to be satisfied that the documents in the Code of Conduct and the Critical Response Plan are adequate in our opinion, before they are approved. So there would be a dialogue in that discussion.
Through you, Mayor, just as a follow-up, so that's just about the negotiation, and clearly there'd have to be the opportunity, if that's possible, to bring it to council next week at some sort of draft, but just to be sure that you're going to make sure you negotiate with them, and if that takes longer, is that going to be fine with admin taking a bit longer on it? It's not a question of having to get it done by a certain time, is it? This has to be done before they can commence, correct?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yes, absolutely correct. So they will need to clear their conditions prior to commencement, otherwise compliance action can be undertaken under legislation.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. And this question may have been asked last time around, but I wasn't at that agenda briefing forum, so sorry if this question was already asked. For office use, we would normally, or is it the case that for office use we would have a management plan? That's the first part question, thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Depending on the circumstances, it wouldn't be unorthodox to have a management plan, especially if it was in a more sensitive zone. So, yeah, you could have a management plan for an office use depending on the particular circumstances.
Any other questions on C2? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and good evening. I'd like to burrow down a little bit more into the management plan and the sort of, given that there is an expectation of some changes in the conditions or tightening it up or so on, I'm interested in what sort of action would be taken, what the city is looking for. Now, to give an example, there's a reference in the sanctuary management plan that says we are mindful of the safety of our neighbours, staff and clients, and therefore have strong protocols to address unexpected behaviour. Staff are also appropriately trained to deal and manage all client-related behaviours. So my question is, with reference to that statement, which is under a title of risk management, what would be their protocols to address unexpected behaviour, and is that the sort of information that the city will be looking for?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So Part B of Condition 2, and I sound a little bit like a broken record, refers to the critical response plan. So you would consider that if there is unexpected behaviour and, it is something that aligns to, something that's critical, there'd be some sort of framework and action that staff and volunteers would put into place that would be able to, control that situation appropriately. So these are the sorts of things that we would be expecting to understand in the updated management plan.
Okay, thank you. To go to another one, where in the same sanctuary management plan they refer to critical incidents, should they occur, will be managed as they are in any household. Depending on the incident, the police, ambulance or fire brigade will be contacted. So once again, I'm asking about the protocol in terms of the action that would be required. And for example, if there is an unexpected frequency of call-outs of police and ambulance and fire brigade, which in turn may cause stress to neighbours, what would be their policy to address that frequency? Or, and I suppose you can't guess that, but would you be asking that question? How would they approach a frequency of call-outs that in turn could have an impact on the neighbourhood and thereby, causing stress and so on? Is that the sort of thing that, once again, you're looking at in tightening up these conditions?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, it's something that we can definitely seek some more clarification from in the management plan. I think the first question might be is, would this type of land use necessarily have, an additional calls to the fire or ambulance or police? And that's probably a question for council to consider based on what's actually being proposed in the context of what would normally happen in a residential zone. So I think there is more information that we can receive, but there is not really anything to staff to suggest that there's going to be any significant additional incidences that require police or ambulance or fire engines compared to any other normal residential use.
Councillor, you're still going. I didn't know if you'd finished or not. Okay.
Two more questions, thank you, through you, Mayor. And another issue is whether you'll be looking for is how, and it's part of the management plan, how RUA will actually address any neighbourhood complaints. You know, are they going to provide an after-hours service? Are they going to be, you know, is that a condition that we're going to expect from them, so that if there's a disturbance in the middle of the night, it's very possible that RUA might be very caught up, the sanctuary may be very caught up, you know, with that incident, but who's going to handle the complaint from neighbours? And is that, once again, something that we would be looking for an answer to?
Good question, and the Manager of Planning Services is online and going to answer that question.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I hope you can all hear me. So advice note, Roman numerals VII, talks about the complaint procedure contained in the management plan being updated, or the applicant being strongly encouraged to provide direct contact details for the program or team lead to the surrounding residential properties. If council was of the mind to include that as a condition of approval, it could be inserted with a bit more strength as part of condition 2, but currently it's an advice note.
Thank you. And one more. I note that the DA condition requires a code of conduct, and there is reference to one in the sanctuary management plan on pages 7 to 8. Is that sufficient, or will the city be asking what protocols are in place for that code to be adhered to? So it's one thing where they sort of list their code of conduct, but we have no idea how they're going to enforce that. And if anyone breaks any of that code, what will happen? So once again, is that the sort of thing the city is looking for? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So if, as the condition 2 requires further information as part of the management plan, once that's, if council was to approve it as currently recommended, as soon as that's approved, then that condition has to be observed by the applicant. So there is an enforcement requirement and ability for the city to monitor that. So that is built into the condition, and that's part of the ongoing planning compliance.
Thank you. So I might have just missed the beginning of that. So what the city is expecting is a code of conduct with an action plan of enforcement. Is that the suggestion? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Anthony. Yes. So the management plan that's actually has been submitted has a guide of the code of conduct. So when we go back to for that to be updated, it will better understand and reflect how that's actually going to be managed throughout the service and use of the site. So some of the compliance aspects with that internally could be fleshed out through that updated management plan. And then, as Anthony has referenced just previously, there are other compliance that we can undertake under relevant planning legislation.
So to sort of sum this up, what the city is looking for out of this management plan is the ability really to apply compliance to it and thereby ensure the protection of the surrounding amenity, so that this new service will be less detrimental on the community. Would that be a right assessment? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, that's essentially a good way to put it. The development controls would ensure compliance and would go a long way to protecting the amenity of the area.
Councillor Kosovic.
Thank you, Mayor. And just going back to what Councillor Stroud said about, particularly with police being called and incidents, there are going to be incidents and a critical incident. Police always categorise complaints. It's not just fair to assume that we're going to have the high level. So you'll always be able to go to the police to work out what category of complaints. It could be someone wandering in off the street, got a wrong address, which could be a minor matter, through to a more severe incident. Thank you.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, this is just to clarify quite a few of the questions about condition 2. Did the applicants provide any reason why they didn't provide those documents A, B and C before the council meeting?
I thought we heard the answer earlier that they're going to wait and get some participation from clients and volunteers so that there's buy-in in relation to those documents. But Director of Development Services, have I captured your previous answer adequately, or is there something else to add?
Yes, you captured it adequately. The only thing I would add is we have reviewed them, and as part of the application consideration process, we are, asking for changes. So they have put them in. We're asking for changes, and as the Mayor eloquently said, looking for buy-in from staff after approval to finalise them.
Sorry, that'd be correct for A, but what about the critical response plan? I mean, would that does that require staff buy-in in the same way?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, that's probably something that the applicant can answer. I understand it is relevant for the Code of Conduct, but perhaps the applicant might work with people who are experienced in this area and who have experience to come up with a critical response plan which will be suitable for the facility. So again, council could request this information prior. It's just that we've considered that it can be done should this be approved.
Councillor White.
Sorry. May I just get clear on that last point before asking? Are you saying that a draft Code of Conduct and Response Plan has been received by Council and that you've responded to that draft and sent it back for further change? Is that correct?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the management plan refers to a Code of Conduct and it refers to some critical actions in there. So we've responded to those parts in the management plan, not any other separate documents.
Thank you. I've got two hopefully quick questions. I am, despite reading the management plan a number of times, still confused about what are the Samaritans, Rua, Sanctuary, and Telecom. Telethon. I get Telethon, but I'm told that the lead applicant to the state government was Rua. And my question is, are they a separate legal entity? Are they, for example, an incorporated association? Are they owned, or are they a subset somehow, sub-entity somehow of the Samaritans? And do I understand it correctly that the Sanctuary would be a program of Rua, which is a sub-entity of the Samaritans? None of this is in the management plan, so I'm lost. Thank you.
They're separate, unrelated entities, but Director of Development Services, the third question, to the extent you're able to comment.
I don't think I'd be able to provide any comment. That's probably something from the applicant that they could provide a response to.
Well, I mean, just to follow up, we do have some sense of the legal relationship that the two parties have entered into for the purpose of this application, don't we? Maybe you can just talk to that. I think that's where the question's headed.
Sorry, Councillor White, if you could just repeat that third question, because I think I've got it mixed up with the other two.
Sorry, I'm not too sure where the multiple questions come in. I'm trying to understand the Samaritans and Rua, are they separate organisations, for example, separate incorporated associations? And is the Sanctuary therefore a program of, but how do they connect? And the Sanctuary, I'm assuming, understanding, I think that this sanctuary is a program of RUA. The question is, what's the actual? Is there a structural link between these?
Thank you, and through yes, it is my understanding that they are separate entities and they're partnering on this proposal. They are entities who provide services that are somewhat related in this in the community development sphere. So they are partnering for this proposal as each element, be it Telethon Kids, RUA, or Samaritans, provide a slightly different approach and bringing it together for this proposal based on the Matrix model. As I understand it, they've just come together with a partnership to deliver this product.
Thank you. My last question is around the issue of, I guess, comes to intensity and amenity. And it's a question, I suppose, is, do you think a facility that will have up to 300 people rotating at 4 nights, up maximum 4 nights each, that is, quite short-term accommodation, would you consider that more intense than accommodation where people are staying for a few months, for example? It seems, the question being, are there more risks in having a very short-term 4-night max stay compared to something where people would stay longer?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. That's a good question. Sometimes if someone's only there for a short time, if there are, and I'm not associating this with anything with the proposal, but if there are some sort of issues, then at least they're only there for 3 or 4 nights, and that's something that we see through Airbnb. So currently in the city, in the residential zone, you can have a short stay dwelling, Airbnb or stays. You don't need any planning approval. I guess it's up to council to form that opinion, but whether someone considers noisy neighbours in a residential dwelling who are there for a year or 2 years, or someone who might change, and I guess the development conditions around ensuring that if there is any issue, then it needs to be addressed by the organisation running it. We believe that that's appropriate to minimise any potential amenity impacts.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Going back to what Councillor White was saying, and the old adage, what's in a name, but we've gone from, and I understand it was almost at the applicant's request, from describing in brackets, which is, as you said, it's not a technical description, but it was being previously last month referred to as a mental health accommodation, and now it's now social.
I was going to give you the answer, so you'll have to press your button again.
Thanks. Where my question comes from is this: what hasn't changed is the fact that in both documents we're still talking about people that I prefer this more casual term, but there's suicidal thoughts and behaviours. Okay, so they have expressed those, but then if you look at the previous agenda from last month, it talked about on page 34 that should a young person be deemed eligible for support, the facility will have the capacity to house 5 residents. To support the residents, there will be a maximum of 5 staff members on site at any given time, comprised of qualified peer workers. I don't quite understand what that means. Trained volunteered counsellors. I don't quite understand what that means. And overseen by clinicians. I understand what a clinician is, okay, it's a serious word. With those combinations across the varying, a combination of those varying across the course of a day, but there's never more than 10 people in a building. My question is this, how do I not take that to be seeing this, not so much, there's another section that talks about during the day they're going to be playing board games and having lunch and reading books, okay? But this is talking about counselling. Now you're either a qualified counsellor or you're not. It seems to be volunteer trained counsellors. I don't get where that is. It's like they're trying to I see it, my question is, where's the line from this becoming a medical facility, from what they call the sanctuary to it being a medical facility? Because that describes to me, in the previous agenda, a medical facility. It's talking about counselling.
Okay, Councillor Burns, the question is, as I understand it, where do you draw the line between a community purpose and a medical centre? And we'll take the Director of Development Services advice on that, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So my understanding of the terms peer work is it might be someone who's actually experienced some of the emotions that some of the people going into this facility are suffering. So it might have been at a previous time. So these people would have the experience, understand what that person might be going through. Counsellors are really there to support people, from my understanding, and in none of those descriptions there's anything to suggest that there's any medical procedures or injections or anything along those lines happening at that facility. So that is my understanding. There is nothing in the management plan, and I think it's quite explicit that there is to be no medical procedures in there. So so drawing the line between this being a community purpose and a medical facility, there's nothing that's in the documentation that suggests that this is a medical facility, and should it be approved by council, those medical facility procedures won't actually be able to occur. Should they occur, like any other property in the city, compliance action can be undertaken and that be stopped.
Before you respond, Councillor Burns, don't debate him. If you've got a question, ask it. But we're not having a debate.
It is. Okay, I accept. Thank you for explaining peer worker. Okay, trained volunteer counsellor. Okay, well, let's say they're not qualified. But the third one, overseen by clinicians. Clinicians is a medical term. Okay, it's not volunteer clinicians, half-trained clinician, so clinicians, and it says they're going to be in there, because it says there'll never be more than 10, including at any time clinicians. So to maintain 10, you've got five people having suicidal thoughts or behaviours, and you've got 5 people looking after them. Arguably, somebody's got to leave the building from the volunteer side so that the clinician can enter. And if anybody wants to tell me clinician is not a medical term, okay, I mean, it's actually, it's a noun to, you've got doctors, it's like a psychiatrist, you've got clinical psychiatrists, you've got clinical psychologists.
Councillor Burns, if I was the one trying to answer this question, I'd be lost at this point. What is the question that you'd like the staff to advise on?
My question is this: please explain to me how having medical clinicians inside that building doesn't turn that building into some sort of definition of a medical facility.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, the easy answer is that if there's a doctor or someone attending that, they might be a volunteer. They might be, they might be medically trained. That doesn't mean that they can undertake medical treatments in that proposed land use. Should it be approved? It's the land use, the conditions, the management plan which apply. Notwithstanding what training anyone might have, they can't actually practice in that approved use. if it is approved.
I'll finish because you're smiling, Mayor McMullen, right? But a doctor in a building, just because he's not doing doctor stuff, still makes to me that I don't think he's in there smoking cigarettes, okay? So I can see you smiling at the answer. The fact that he's a clinician's in there, I'll leave it at this and we'll deal with it at the meeting. But I'm sorry, that answer did not satisfy me, but I'm not going to take it any further.
I might just be in a good mood tonight, Councillor Burns. But look, I think there is a fair question in there. You know, suppose a doctor is on site. A planning approval surely cannot prevent said doctor from performing their craft. If they're on site and there's a need for a doctor, I mean, all other things being equal, haven't they taken an oath that would require them to be a doctor? I'm not really understanding the previous question either. So if you could just clarify it a bit, please.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, this is really getting tricky now. If there was a first aid situation in this building and I had to do first aid because I'm qualified, I mean, this isn't a treatment facility for people who are having that. So notwithstanding, if there is an emergency use in any household, office, anywhere in Western Australia, that would essentially be an emergency thing. It wouldn't necessarily be a doctor coming into the facility to treat people for certain things. If there is an emergency, then I guess there are other provisions which apply, but it's not in the planning approval.
Okay, well, there's email between now and next week. Councillor Stroud.
Mayor, you're a lawyer. Do you practice your law in this in the council chamber?
I make a point of not practicing law when I'm in the council chamber.
So the point is that just because you're a doctor in a place doesn't mean that you practice. You're a lawyer. You're a lawyer here in a council chamber, but you're not practicing your law. So that's my point. Thank you.
Look, I'm not going to debate it because we're not here to debate. Anyone? Any other questions? Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, I did just have a question arising out of one of Councillor White's questions, which is around who is the applicant, because it did bring to mind the question. So the Samaritans of WA are the applicant, the landowner. The applicant is somebody called PTS Town Planning, Pty Ltd. Who is the party to whom a planning approval would be issued were that to occur, and who is responsible for ensuring that conditions are met? In other words, who would be dealing with if it did get to a point where we had to knock on the door and say we don't think you're meeting the conditions?
Thank you, and through you, Matt, good question. So conditions run and development approvals run with the land. So it would be a combination of either the landowner or whoever is conducting those operations in any compliance manner. And it's similar to any other lease that may occur over any land or any use. So it's pretty common that an applicant for a planning application wouldn't necessarily be the landowner. It could be someone who acts on their behalf, but any compliance will be directed to either or the landowner or the person who's undertaking either the works or use on that land.
Councillor Hammersley, are you formulating another question or just pondering the answer?
I think, just so to clarify, we would be dealing with the landowner. Is that the answer?
Thank you. The short answer is you'd be dealing with both, so the landowner and whoever is undertaking the works or use on that land, but I'm just researching the actual provision in the Planning and Development Act.
Doing that, because I think what that leads to is this question about, you know, the assurances that are being offered, although not yet expressed, in respect of the Code of Conduct, the Critical Response Plan and the handover procedures. So who's the appropriate organisation to agree those documents with the city?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So I've found a reference, and the reference talks to a person. So a person who contravenes the provisions of a planning scheme, and it's got a number of lists under Section 218 of the Planning and Development Act. So that could actually be the landowner or an applicant or someone who's using the land. Now, the applicant for this is PTS Town Planning. So the city ordinarily would liaise with the applicant in determining that. However, the applicant acts on the landowner's behalf. So they've actually signed a form to say that the applicant is acting for them, and they would need to be obviously in discussions between separate parties.
Any final questions on C2? Okay, I think we're ready to move on to C3. Rockaby Road and Hay Street Heritage Area Modifications and Draft Local Planning Policy 3.6. Any questions? Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, I note that there are quite a number of buildings listed for change in their level of contribution. One of them, in fact, I think is 424 and 428 Hay Street. What difference would it make changing the current level from some to considerable as far as heritage and heritage protection is concerned?
Mr. Petrovsky.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. If a place has some contribution, it still has heritage protection in place. So elevating it to considerable contribution really just details the nature of the heritage place in the area. So it wouldn't have any further statutory protection, but it would have further guidance in our local planning policy on the protection of those buildings. It just elevates it to something that's essentially seen to be more important in the council's view.
Thank you. Just a little follow-up on that. It's suggested that, in fact, in regard to that, and I think in regard to some of the other buildings, that it could be an application could be made to put it on the heritage list. Is that how would that be done? Would it be done by the council? Would it be done by the owner? Would it how would that be achieved? And in fact, has already a private application been made to have those buildings listed? Do you know? Previously?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So, as I understand, you're talking about the State Register of Heritage Places. Thank you for the confirmation. Yes, so a private application was made, I'm going to say, over a year ago by a private landowner, and these 424 to 436 Hay Street and 440 Hay Street were considered by the Heritage Council. The Heritage Council considered that both properties had heritage value to the local area, however they weren't considered for inclusion on the state register. So, I mean, the city could try again, but given it's a recent decision, we're still comfortable that they have great heritage value to the city of Subiaco.
Any other questions on C3? Let's go to C4. 2023 local government ordinary election. Any questions? Councillor Burns.
I've been doing this for a long time, so bear with me, but is there any... I presume the answer is going to be no, but I actually prefer a old school vote where you actually have to show up and vote as opposed to postal. I don't think most people are a fan of it, but in changing times and door knocking and COVID and all sorts of things like that, I might foreshadow that I might put an amendment in between now and then that we consider the old school methodology, because door knocking with masks and all that sort of stuff, it might be an appropriate time, but I've always suggested that we move away from postal voting. It's not, it's not something that I'm keen on, so it's not really a question, I suppose. So if I'm in trouble, I'm sorry.
Thanks for foreshadowing that. Any other questions on C4? Councillor Kosovich.
Just picking up on what the councillor said then. The previous election we had both. Why is there now, are we moving to the first option being postal voting and not in-person voting, please?
Well, Councillor Kosovich, previous elections have been postal votes, but that doesn't preclude a voter from dropping in their vote at the polling place on the day. And as I understand it, there's no proposal to change from that method. So postal vote ballots, as I understand it, means that papers are sent out by post and can be returned by post. Or if you're inclined, you can bring it in and drop it in the box on the day. Any other questions? Councillor Stroud?
Yes, thank you. I sent out a question today about now electors have a choice of preferential voting. And this is going to add a whole nother layer to the night of counting. That concerns me, given the last 2 years ago was a relatively simple, should have been a relatively simple evening. If you remember, Mayor, you and I were still there till after 9. The party had started at your place, but we were still there waiting for the final outcome of your vote, because there'd actually been a mistake made. Now, I sent and asked, what assurances do we have, if any, from the WAEC that this will be managed and in a timely manner? The response was we would never get an assurance from WAEC, the Electoral Commission. But is there anything wrong with actually asking them how they plan to manage the evening? Just to alert them to our concern that we do want to get home that night. Thank you.
CEO.
Thank you. And yes, I gave that response in terms of there was an extraordinary election with one vacancy that went on into the wee hours of the evening. So what we can do is write to them and describe and ask for updated protocols, but ultimately it will still come down to, given that it's a complex method of calculation, it comes down to the people that we have on the night counting those ballots in each of the areas and making sure that that adds up. So if there's any slight miscount in the various piles, then you can have a recalculation. So it's all got to add up. So we can ask the Electoral Commission to what extent are they going to assist in that matter, but it'll still come down to that vote. So we certainly look at trying to improve that between now and then, what else we might be able to do.
Another question. The presiding officer seemed to keep stepping out. I assumed he was using our phone to ring the backup electoral commission. I didn't quite even understand that system, why they don't work from their own mobile. It would seem to be a lot more expedient than, if I'm right in understanding. Appreciate that you weren't here. I'm wondering who was. That, you know, there's some system where they use, they're using a landline phone or something. Do you know what's going on there, and whether even that could be more efficient?
Yeah, having been involved in many, I think I was here for the last one. Whether they've updated their procedures or not, or how they work, but predominantly it's sort of a casual position, I suppose. Each is allocated to each of the areas, and the competency is going to depend on, you know, how experienced that person is, and also the procedures that they're given. So quite often there might be a technical glitch in trying to update the data to the Commission's website, etc., and so they're seeking help in that regard. And given all the elections are on the same night, it may take some time to get through. So, yeah, I mean, they're experienced at running these, but the people that's allocated to each local government, their experience would vary on that, and so they may have troubles uploading the information.
So if I want a letter written, just to give some focus to it, and that the standard we would like to receive in some way, is it possible? Do you need an amendment? I mean, sorry, do you need some sort of amendment to that staff recommendation, or can I accept that it will be done anyway? Thank you.
Yeah, there won't be an amendment. It's certainly something that I have a concern about myself, so we'll be writing to them to just ask them what procedures are in place to assist, etc. And in particular, we'll work with and try and assist. But some of those issues are also us, in terms of us providing staff to do the counting, etc. So, but I'll certainly be writing to the Electoral Commission. You don't need to do an amendment.
That's another question. Thank you, through you, Mayor. Do we actually provide staff, our own staff? Do we on the night? I hadn't noticed that before.
In everywhere else I've worked in the past, we've provided staff, but I'll hand over to Lee.
The city does provide staff on the day of the election. We provide assistance to the Electoral Commission appointees so that they've got adequate access for IT, administrative assistance, printing, etc. So there are a number of staff. There were 4 of us here for the last election 2 years ago.
So it was backup IT and so on, but not for counting.
No, the staff at that point in time were not required to assist with the counting. That was all done by the Electoral Commission.
Perhaps I'll just clarify. They're technically hired by the Electoral Commission, but they could be our staff. Does that make sense?
Any final questions about C4? Okay, let's go to C5. Property and Investment Assets Committee and Economic and Business Development and Sustainability Committee. Any questions? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a pretty basic question with something that I suppose I should have satisfied myself a long time ago. But under the Local Government Act, there's a definition of committees, and it's the committees of council. And then it talks about, in 5.8 of the Local Government Act, establishment of committees. And it says the local government may establish committees of 3 or more elected members, or 3 or more persons rather, and there's a conjunctive, and to exercise the powers of decision-making powers of council on the matters before the committee. So, sorry, it's a bit long-winded, the question, sorry. So our committees do not have delegated authority. So are our committees actually considered to be, for the purposes of the Local Government Act, committees of council? That's my first question.
CEO.
Yes, so if a committee is formed, resolved to, which this was, it is a committee of council. Committees of council can have delegated authority if council resolve that delegated authority. In this case, council has not, but they are still a committee of council.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Seems to be one of the rationales for the changeover is that, you know, we've got detailed agendas and reports rather than strategic thinking and planning. It's a bit of a rhetorical question, I guess, but can't that occur in the context of committee meetings if there's an item provided that there's a bit of a discussion about, oh, where are we going in a particular matter or generally? There's nothing to stop us. Well, I'm speculating. Would there be anything to stop us having that kind of discussion at committee meetings? Thanks.
Well, before I ask the CEO to answer that, one of the complaints that I've heard about committees is that by the time a report's going to a committee, you might say that it's too late to be having such discussions, but CEO, what would your answer to that be?
So through the chair, essentially a committee is, I suppose, deemed to be a little bit more rigid in terms of both the meeting procedures, local law applies, but as can happen in council meetings as well, you can suspend standing orders and have more of a free flow conversation. So I suppose that's essentially the issue, is that it is a formal type committee where reports are put to that committee you know, the CEO is required to produce those reports and the agenda, and then it's up to the committee to consider those and that committee how it wishes to deal with those, and generally they would then make recommendations to council. But ultimately, standing orders allow for suspension of standing orders to speak more freely.
Thank you. If I just follow-up question. So if you wouldn't mind clarifying, CEO, so in theory we could have that kind of discussion, an item on the agenda, if it was put on the agenda for stuff that's coming up or whatever the strategic planning or thinking we might want to engage in. We actually could, an agenda item could address that.
So through the meeting procedures laws, you're required to follow the same basic format as the council, which is therefore a report that would be prepared by officers in a formal sense. So if something's not on there, you're not really able to just adjust a new item, I suppose. But what I was referring to more is the ability to have more of a free-forming discussion. You could suspend the meeting procedures laws to allow that to occur, but it's not necessarily free for all and just determine different matters at that particular meeting, because there's still that structure applied in terms of the meeting procedures, local law, and the agenda that's formally prepared with officer information and consideration.
I think sometimes at committee meetings where isn't there an item, often any other business, and then we end up discussing other business which there's no report for. Isn't that the case?
So I'd have to pull out the regulations, but what I'm referring to is generally that relates to items for discussion rather than putting forward recommendations of council without officers providing information. I'd have to pull out the section that relates to that.
Any other questions on C5? Okay. You've got to be quick. Okay, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. So if task teams are decided that's the way we're going to go, council decides that, how are we going to have a record of what's, well, there won't be a formal decision-making body, but that is one good thing about committees, that, you know, there's a record of what goes on. So, and the accessibility of that record, whatever it might be, by future councils, and that would be one of my concerns, is like what will be the record keeping process for task teams.
So certainly we would be required to sort of keep some minutes, etc., of that. That would form part of the record keeping plan of the city, which would form part of, I suppose, our collective knowledge. They wouldn't necessarily be contained on the website like council meetings are, but that would be up to the form and content of that would be up to the elected members to feel comfortable with, that was a good representation of sort of what was considered, and then that would assist, I suppose, staff in preparing additional information, I imagine, that would form part of a report to council in probably a similar way to in which we capture information and report it to elected members via the EMIB. You know, it would sort of form part of that sort of body of knowledge, and no doubt we'd probably put a section relating to that on the councillor portal. So that's how I would sort of perceive that the information, in the same way that strategic workshops, the documents relating to those are contained there, and elected members can go back and access those.
Okay. I don't think there's any final questions on C5. So C6, please. Financial statements for the month ending 31 January 2023. Doesn't look like there's any questions. So there's no need to close the briefing this evening. Sorry, there's no need to close it to the public, but I will close the briefing. I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 14th of March closed at 6:49 p.m. Thanks, everyone.